Some of the issues that you've been focusing on are very sort of complex subjects to do with migration, identity, and also the diaspora. So can you start off with telling us how you in fact sort of communicate these very complex subjects to your audience, the means you use?
As a filmmaker, as a photographer, I think the first place one should always start is with stories that are familiar to them. And so I think it's always a conversation. I think the films that I tend to make tend to be about people's stories and everyday people's stories. And so I think once people also realize my connection to these issues or my own background or something like that, I think there's always a point of conversation to start, especially with the diaspora project, Home Away from Home. I think once people realize that, I grew up in America, but that my family's from Sri Lanka, whether they're in Trinidad or whether they're in South Africa or whether they're in Kenya, immediately, they get how my story relates to their story. And so I think people enjoy being interviewed about something that everybody is kind of their own expert on. And so, engaging people in their own stories and also contextualizing their stories in the timeline of the larger political situation that might have been happening in their country, so that their story becomes kind of a stand-in for a smaller story that represents a much larger story.
In terms of your work, like some of the pieces that I was looking at, there seems to be a focus perhaps on women and their experience as migrants. Do you think adapting to a new culture may prove more difficult for women? Could you talk to us a little bit about that, the pieces that you did particularly on women?
For women, especially for the women in my the short film that I'm working on, Claiming Our Voice, which focuses on South Asian domestic workers here in Queens, New York. I think it's a different situation. I think it's different when you migrate to a country in your 20s or your 30s, and you don't have family here, and you're kind of on your own. I mean, I think that's a tough situation for anybody. But which is why this organization that was founded on the Lan to support South Asian domestic workers. এই সমাজের বঞ্চনার সইতে পারি না আমি সইতে পারবো না
I came here to work and have a better life.
I was keeping a domestic violence situation in Bangladesh.
আর এখানে আসার পরে সব কাজ আমি করতাম, আমাদের কোনো অসুবিধা নেই, তুই চলে যদি যাস চলে যা। আর আমি যদি বলতাম যে আমি একটু বাইরে যাই, বলে বাইরে যাবি না, পুলিশে ধরে নিয়ে যাবে।
Little by little, my mind was searching something to do, change this kind of bad situation and exploitation.
We are all together fighting our rights.
Everybody has a voice. It's just about
just
building the muscles.
Need a practice.
Building the muscles to support our voice.
Everybody has a story. My country's people always say their own story. I can try my own stories, then somebody learned from me.
It's just a way to get this part of us out to somebody else. Use this as a way to let it go. I'm asking for both heart and discipline.
The people who they could not even talk from the beginning, now they're telling their story. I feel so courage and empowered by them.
When you're doing domestic work, which is, cooking or cleaning or taking care of, people's children in their homes, I don't think people expect you to be an activist. So I really like that this story is not your normal story of somebody else coming in who has nothing to do, that has no experience in those issues, coming in to help them. I was born here and my family's here, and you have some kind of a base, but I think it's especially for any immigrant that comes here without family, without support. I think it's an incredibly difficult, and I think for women too. I mean, the culture clash in America, I think, is coming from South Asia. I think it's extreme as a woman.
I mean, your own experience has a great deal to do with maybe the inspiration behind your work. So does any of that reflect the Sri Lankan politics or the Sri Lankan diaspora and the more sort of the many elements of the diaspora?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I started out the multimedia project Home Away from Home, which is it's a large project, and I think I started out not knowing exactly where I wanted to take it, and you figure that out as you shoot it, which is sometimes scary and sometimes very liberating. But knowing that I wanted to focus on the global South Asian diaspora, and within that, there's so many countries, and there's so many countries of origin, and there's so many countries that people have migrated to in large numbers. But I think my goal with that project was to try and get different. I mean, it's still underway. It's still kind of happening. Is to get different aspects of migration stories, migration patterns. So, in South Africa and Trinidad, it's very much stories of indentured servitude, and that's how people arrived in those countries in large numbers from South India, and whereas in Kenya, it's more merchants that came over to where, and still that have been there for a long time, and there were some indentured labor as well. But and I think the next couple of places I choose are going to be more contemporary migrations. I definitely want to make, at least a couple of stories about Sri Lanka within this diaspora story.